interpretations. Scandinavia includes the countries of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. And many centuries ago, this rugged landscape gave rise to a hardy and mysterious people called the Norse.
In the early Bronze Age, there were a number of Germanic peoples that came up into this peninsula, the Scandinavian peninsula, but they were meeting completely different people with a different culture and a very different language. Eventually, these groups of people come together and they become the Norse.
For many years, the Norse were a peaceful people who scratched out an existence as farmers, fishermen, and hunters. But that changed dramatically in the 8th century AD with the rise of the Vikings.
Viking is a term for Scandinavian pirates and raiders who made their mark on world history between the late 700s and the early 1000s. One thing we have to understand is the Vikings technically is a profession. It isn't the people that were living there. The scholars call the people that were living there the Norse. The Vikings were the ones that went on raiding and trading expeditions.
Sailing on their fearsome longships, the Vikings terrorized Europe. They could strike anywhere and seemingly without warning.
The Viking longships were excellent ships for traveling the open ocean, but also of rivers and the far inland. Nobody was really expecting these guys. People were unprotected. Cities were unprotected. Monasteries with vast amounts of gold were unprotected. And so when these raids started happening, everyone was caught by surprise. The Vikings completely upset the balance of power throughout Europe.
But despite their reputation as fierce conquerors, the Vikings were also skilled merchants, and they set up trade routes that reached every corner of the map.
The Vikings were going both east and west into France and down into Spain and the Mediterranean from that direction. And then east into what would become Russia and down into places like Constantinople.
The long-term effects of the Viking Age are manifold. There are huge linguistic influences on languages like English and French. There is a massive political influence in Eastern Europe, where, for example, Russia draws its name from the name of the tribe of Swedish Vikings who invaded that part of Eastern Europe. We have the Byzantine emperors guarded by Viking bodyguards. We have Vikings in Baghdad trading with Arab traders. We have Vikings in the New World exploring at least as far as present-day Canada.
Immovable beach!
The age of the Vikings lasted just 300 years, from the middle of the 8th century until the 11th century. But despite their accomplishments, much about the Norse remains shrouded in mystery. Unlike other cultures at the time, they did not keep detailed written records of their history. Instead, they wrote brief inscriptions with runes.
Runes are an early form of Viking writing. They have been employed largely in carving in stone, so we see a lot of rune stones. But runes were kind of cumbersome to write with, and so things tend to be short. It's not like the written literature that we get later.
Much about Norse history remained unknown until roughly 300 years after the Viking era.
We would know very, very little if it weren't for two books from 1200s Iceland called Edda. The first book was written by an Icelandic chieftain named Snorri Sturluson, and in the 1220s or so, he wrote the prose Edda to protect the heritage and the old stories. Also in the 1220s in Iceland, someone, we don't know who, wrote a book that would have happened. And this is just 30 or so of those poems about pre-Christian gods and pre-Christian Norse heroes, written down by someone who was preserved them because many of these seem to have been preserved in the century.
Others have provided historians with detailed accounts of Viking conquests. The ranges
trickster god and oftentimes trying to deceive people. And deception is a very important component of warfare.
Frey was the Norse god of fertility, and his sister Freya, by the way, was the night goddess.
Thor is one of the main deities we see in Norse mythology. That's thunder, lightning. One of his most elemental symbols that we see again and again is his hammer. Thor's hammer seems to have been used as a protector symbol. People would wear it around very often around their neck on a necklace for protection.
While today, the Norse gods are regarded as simply characters in ancient mythological tales, to the Vikings, they were very real.
The Norse gods were not apart from the world, they were a part of the world. They were not simply praised on Sunday mornings, they were approached in ongoing reciprocal relationships maintained through sacrificial rituals.
You give the gods something for them to give you something. So you sacrifice an animal hoping that the god that you're sacrificing it to will receive your gift and say, I favor him, I want to give him something.
It was important for the Viking to have contact with the gods because they needed that power where they was doing things, going other places.
The Viking offered to Thor and asked for fair weather for his travels. You don't sacrifice horses, weapons, and treasure you won in battle unless you believe there are deities receiving the sacrifices. You don't raise altars to goddesses across the width of the world you travel unless you believe in building a reciprocal relationship with those goddesses. This is clearly backed by archaeological finds, sacrificial sites, burial sites, and so on.
The Scandinavians undoubtedly thought that the gods would have been real. They would not have necessarily thought of them as metaphors.
While mainstream scholars suggest the Scandinavians' strong belief in the existence of their gods was simply a matter of faith, ancient astronaut theorists ask if these powerful beings might have truly existed. And if so, could they have assisted the Vikings in becoming one of the world's most sophisticated explorers and warriors? Perhaps further clues can be found by examining descriptions of the Norse gods' incredible technology. Most of what is known about Norse mythology comes from the 13th century text called the Eddas, but they recount a history that begins many centuries earlier. And according to the Eddas, the first ruler of the area, now known as Denmark, was the son of the god Odin named Skioldr. For ancient astronaut theorists, this is particularly intriguing because it lines up with numerous other traditions around the world. This is almost identical to what we find in ancient Egypt. You have this golden age in which the gods walked on the earth, which the gods ruled, and then ultimately in Egypt the pharaoh becomes the representative of the gods themselves, just as Emperor Jimmu became the representative of Amadou Saru in Japan. And also Huang Ti, the legendary first emperor of China, the Yellow Emperor, who was said to sail into the stars and back to Earth. What's fascinating is that this idea occurs in ancient cultures around the world. Another similarity that Norse mythology shares with other traditions across the planet is the idea that the gods come from another world. In Norse mythology, the universe is divided into 9 worlds. It's the realm of the gods, the realm of men, the realm of giants, the dwarves, the elves, and so forth. The Norse gods inhabited the realm of Asgard and came to Earth, known as Midgard, traveling across a rainbow bridge called Bifrost. But descriptions of Bifrost do not portray any kind of structure like a traditional bridge.
Bifrost means shimmering road, and the Edda tells us that it's the rainbow raised by the gods to connect the heavens and the earth.
Bifrost is a burning bridge. The red that is the top layer of the rainbow's color is supposed to be the fire. I'm only aware of stories in which supernatural beings cross Bifrost, and some of them can't. The fire somehow burns them, but doesn't seem to burn the gods.
Bifrost is also known as the trembling or quivering way, suggesting that it is constantly moving. As far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, it's possible that the Old Norse stories were attempting to describe a wormhole connecting Earth to a distant planet.
A wormhole is a shortcut across the universe. And it's actually a structure predicted by the theory of general relativity. So there's science behind it.
The Scandinavians wrote that through Bifrost, these celestial beings descended from the sky. In the ancient astronaut opinion, that almost seems like some type of a portal technology, because it was instantaneous travel to the so-called realm of the gods. Could it be that the Norse gods were in fact extraterrestrials that traveled to Earth through some kind of space-time portal? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest further evidence to support this incredible notion can be found by examining elements from the Norse stories that sound like descriptions of high technology.
Norse mythology is filled with a concept that I refer to as misunderstood technology. In Norse mythology, we have stories of Odin, the highest god, for example, with his 8-legged horse Sleipnir. That was a celestial horse that flew across the sky, leaving behind a trail of fire. We all know that horses do not have 8 legs, and we also know that horses do not fly across the sky, leaving behind a fiery trail. So why do we have these stories? The pantheon of gods were advanced space travelers that our ancestors witnessed and thought, wow, they have to be gods because they just descended from the sky.
Odin, the god of the dead and the god of warfare, interacted often with humans in the Norse stories. It is also written that from his magical throne, called Hlidskjalf, he could observe all 9 realms.
Hlidskjalf sits at the top of this great tree called Yggdrasil, and Odin can look down on all of creation and see what's happening.
He could see everything. He could hear everything as well. It makes you wonder if this magic watchtower is an advanced alien technology. Another prominent figure in Norse mythology was Frey, the god of fertility. Frey possessed the most incredible ship in all of the 9 realms.
Frey had an interesting device. It was a ship. And this ship was so big that you could put all of the Norse deities in it and all their weapons. And then you could fold it up, sort of like origami, and Frey could put it in his pocket.
To us, when we hear a story like this, it automatically conjures images of advanced nanotechnology, or perhaps a material science where they had an ability to create a lightweight material that could be folded into smaller dimensions and then could be unfolded into a much larger dimension. Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that descriptions of the weapons wielded by the gods also sound like advanced technology.
Odin has Gungnir, the spear of heaven, that is also exemplary of what we would think of as modern technology today. When he would throw this spear, it would automatically hit whatever target he threw it at. And when we think about that today, it sounds identical to some kind of like heat-seeking missile or some guided precision weapon that has these incredible capabilities.
Thor's hammer Mjolnir has a variety of special powers. It can be thrown and will always come back to Thor. He can shrink it down to the size of an ordinary amulet so he can wear it around his neck, and it can also break anything that it hits.
Curiously, Thor could only use his hammer while wearing a special metal glove.
It's really interesting to note that all these ancient stories around the Norse, these magical imbued objects, weapons and such, they're very similar to things that we can reference today. To me, it sounds like this is misunderstood technology. Ancient people
people were viewing things, and they didn't have a technological lens for reference.
Is it possible that the Norse gods were not fictional creations, but were instead visitors from another planet? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and suggest there may even be evidence that these beings had a hand in the success of the Vikings. Or in Scotland, here, in an ancient glacial valley, stands a 5,000-year-old megalithic structure known as the Dwarfy Stave. According to the locals, the Vikings who invaded this region claimed the inner chamber served as the home of a dwarf. For the Norse people, the dwarves were not fictional creations, but real entities who inhabited a hidden realm beneath the earth. According to the Eddas, these diminutive beings were created by the gods to craft weapons and technology.
The Old Norse term dvergur, translated by its English cognate dwarf, refers to a kind of supernatural being much lower than the gods that interacts both with them and with us. Their main function in sagas is to make stuff, whether for the gods or for human beings.
The dwarves are an interesting figure in Norse mythology. They're not gods, they're not people, and they show up as being very powerful, very magical. And so the gods are constantly interacting with the dwarves. But a lot of the power of the Norse gods is derived from the dwarves.
They're the ones that have an extraordinary ability to create things. Dwarves were described as being the best smiths. When the gods need to have things created, they go to the dwarves. These were the creators of these most important elements of the Viking world. Things
The dwarves were also credited as being master sword makers. But the swords they forged were not just for the gods. They were also made for humans, and they were said to possess
Their creations with magic and make stuff for human beings. For example, there's human heroes who have magical swords of different varieties. The most important story of the heroes is the story of Sigurd, Dragon's Head. Sigurd has a magic sword.
According to the story, a dwarf forges Sigurd a sword so sharp it can cut through the impenetrable scales of a dragon. Other songs describe weapons that were powerful enough to even kill the gods.
There's the magic sword Tyrving, which can only be drawn and put back into its scabbard if it draws blood in the meantime. So you can't put it back in the scabbard unless you kill someone.
While tales of the dwarves being skilled weapons makers are considered by historians to be purely mythological, what can't be disputed is that the Vikings possessed swords far superior to any others that were made during their time. Suldal, Norway, March 2024. While clearing his field of rocks, a farmer stumbles upon a remarkably well-preserved Viking sword half buried in the soil. The weapon is given to archaeologists who determine it is more than 1,000 years old, and discovered that the blade contains a mysterious inscription. X-ray imaging reveals that the sword is inscribed with the name Ulfbert.
The Ulfbert swords were made between about 800 and 1000 AD, so quite solid in the high Viking period, when they were trading and raiding.
The recently unearthed weapon is one
completely different to any other weapons found in medieval Europe. These Ulfberht swords were made of a very hard steel and would be vastly superior to any other weapon in combat.
The Ulfberts were special because of the manufacturing techniques that went into them. Some of them were made from a crucible steel, which could have both flexible properties and edge hardness in a single item.
Perhaps most baffling is that to create the Ulfberht swords, Norse blacksmiths would have had to heat their forges to over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But historians and archaeologists suggest that humans didn't develop the ability to achieve such an extreme heat until the Industrial Revolution, nearly 800 years after the Viking Age. So just who could have created these extraordinary weapons? Could it be that the Norse stories of dwarves forging incredible swords were not merely mythology?
When you think about this, you have to at least be open to the possibility that the swords of the Norse Vikings were created by these dwarves who were masters at this advanced technology. When you talk to people who live in Norway and Sweden and Iceland, over 60% of the people in a survey claim that they believe in these beings. With the Ulfberht blades, we still don't know who made them. We don't know exact techniques of how they were made. Some were incredibly advanced in their techniques, quite beautiful, hard to produce even today in a modern shop.
We don't know why the word Ulfberht was used. It was assumed, without any evidence, that it was a swordsmith's name, but it may have been simply the name of somebody whom the smith met or killed. They may have thought it was something sacred. I don't know.
What does Ulfberht mean? It's probably not a person. It was probably a word of power. Wolf means wolf, and Bert is an adjective, meaning bright. So it might be bright wolf. Until we find some documented evidence of manufacture, we may never know the exact construction or the exact raw material that these were made from. And that adds to the mystery of these blades.
Is it possible that the dwarves of Norse mythology were real beings, and that they helped the Vikings to craft their incredible swords? Perhaps further clues can be found by examining another technology that the Vikings were said to have received from the dwarves. A highly sophisticated navigation device that was long believed to be mythological until one was discovered at the bottom of the ocean. Tonsberg, Norway, summer 1904. Over a period of 3 months, Scandinavian archaeologists Gabriel Gustafsson and Håkon Chevalier excavate a remarkably well-preserved Viking ship. Built from oak in the early 9th century AD, the vessel is an extraordinary piece of engineering.
One of the things that the Vikings had was a ship that was a technological marvel for the time. They could go up and down rivers, they could go across oceans without flipping over as much as the previous ships had done. And this meant that they had the ability to get into areas that other people at the time
special stone that enabled them to navigate with great accuracy.
In the Norse sagas, we get mention of something called the Solstein, the sunstone. And this is a kind of translucent mineral that's oblong shaped and has special magical powers. And it's something that the captain of a Viking warship would hold up to the cloudy sky, and through it would be able to see where the sun was. And that was essential to navigation.
These crystals were pretended to be magic, and it's been long rumored that the sunstone may have been a major part of their navigational abilities, giving them an edge that other people at the time did not.
Was the Viking sunstone simply a creation of Norse mythology? Or might it have really existed? The English Channel, March 2013. Underwater archaeologists are exploring a 16th century sunken English warship when they come upon an unusual crystal carved into a nearly perfect rectangle. Researchers are shocked when tests reveal that the object was carved from a chunk of Icelandic calcite. And they suspect they have found one of the fabled Viking sunstones.
Calcite has a property that as light comes into it, it splits the light in half. On a cloudy day, if you look at a calcite crystal, you see not one image, but two images. Each one polarized slightly differently. And as you scan the sky, the intensity of these two changes depending upon where the sun is located. But when you look onto the sun, the two images are equally bright. Bingo. That's where the sun is located. And that's how the Vikings could do it. Without a compass, they simply pointed it toward the sun until the two images matched in intensity.
For archaeologists, almost as exciting as the discovery of a Viking sunstone was the fact that it was found on a 16th century shell.
What that shows us is that 500 years after the disappearance of the Vikings, their technology was still being used. This was still cutting-edge technology.
Might the sunstone provide physical evidence that the tales of Norse mythology are not entirely fiction, but could be based on real events? And if so, might otherworldly beings, like the dwarves and gods described in the Viking sagas, have shared knowledge with the ancient people of Scandinavia? For ancient astronaut theorists, the answer is a resounding yes. Throughout Norse mythology, they really have an abundance of these magical imbued objects. But if the Norse people had the ability to use a crystal that is some type of astronomical beacon to actually know where the sun was, this is some advanced science. And perhaps someone taught the Norse people to understand the principles of using such a technology. From the technological marvel known as the Sunstone, to the highly advanced Viking swords, and mythology that reads like modern science fiction, ancient astronaut theorists suggest there is abundant evidence that the Norse people had encounters with otherworldly beings. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence of all can be found by closely examining the ritual of the Viking funeral. Dinah Beach, Australia, July 12, 2025. At a modern-day yacht club, more than 7,000 miles from Scandinavia, a ceremony is held to recreate one of the most important and iconic Norse rituals, the Viking funeral. In the days of the Vikings, the body of the deceased would be floated out to sea aboard a ship. Then a flaming arrow launched to set it ablaze.
There's a whole symbology behind those rituals, and this is interesting because the whole idea of burning the dead is the smoke rises so that their essence could reach the realm of the gods. That is the legend behind it. But you have to ask yourself the question, what's the origin for that? What was the realm realm of the gods? Was it just a spiritual place, something ethereal? The ancient astronaut theory suggests, hold on a minute, maybe they actually meant a physical place.
The Viking funeral was symbolic of a journey to Asgard, the realm of the gods. But according to the Old Norse stories, the actual journey happened on the battlefield, and it was carried out by the Valkyries, who are described as mortal women with divine powers.
In Norse mythology, you have Valkyries, who are warrior princesses who ride winged horses. And they fly over the battlefields and they pick up the bravest of the warriors, particularly as they're just about to die or if they have died. And they carry their spirits up to Valhalla, which is the palace of fallen warriors and the feasting hall.
The Vikings didn't fear death because when they died, they went to Valhalla, and there Odin would provide them with a banquet every night. They could eat and drink as much as they want.
In the Norse tales, Valhalla is portrayed as a great hall in Asgard, where Odin, the ruler of the gods, welcomes fallen warriors. The hall is described as a physical place made of gleaming metal, held up by spear shafts and roofed by shields. And as far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, it's possible that Valhalla was not some mythical paradise, but something far more profound.
According to the ancient astronaut theory, Valhalla could be another name for an orbiting space station or something like that. The reason why I'm saying this is because whenever we have a description of Valhalla, it is an incredible description of a place that has attributes that I refer to as mystical technology. Various descriptions of Valhalla give it the reference of being some type of a large metallic ship. Add to the fact that Valhalla is described as a place that they actually journeyed to. Maybe this is some type of a description of them traveling to this in a ship, and since they put their dead in ships and set them afire, maybe this is actually a reference of them traveling to Valhalla in a ship that has flames coming out of it, going into space.
Could it be that the Old Norse tales of Valhalla were describing some kind of craft or space station that was orbiting the Earth? And might the Viking funeral ceremony have been designed to mimic the fire and smoke produced by a rocket ship blasting off into space? Curiously, the Norse were not the only ancient culture to incorporate ships into their funerary rites.
In Norse mythology, you would have this concept of taking some kind of transport into the other world. This is something that has been around for thousands of years and appears around the world. It's in Africa, it's in South America, it's in China. With Egyptian funeral rites, oftentimes there would be a funeral boat that was associated with it. And these boats themselves would be analogies of spaceships, in fact. It would take them over the stars. The fact that around the world we find in ancient myths and legends, to me, is not a coincidence, but on the contrary, it relays that true origin was a worldwide visitation by visiting extraterrestrials.
Is it possible that modern reenactments of the Viking funeral
that it was the malfunctioning of a Russian ballistic missile. Other people had more exotic theories. It looks just awe-inspiring. It really, truly did.
我操，鸡
So
巴
naturally, there's a
呀！
lot of question, wondering, what is it? Is this a UFO related thing, or is it not? Some people say this is the opening of a wormhole. Something's come through.
The Norwegian spiral anomaly made headlines around the world. And it was only the latest in a number of extraordinary mass UFO sightings that have occurred over the area of Scandinavia. Since the 1930s, residents of the small mountain village of Hastel in Norway have been reporting strange lights of various colors that appear at night, and sometimes even during the day.
People see bright lights moving very near to the houses. Balls of lights, even shapes sometimes. And these lights can last for minutes or even hours. The reports continue for decades. And in 1983, Norwegian electrical engineer Erling Strand started a research project to investigate the phenomenon. In the early 80s, it was a lot of sightings. We had 20 observations 1 week. The Heston lights can be more traditional UFO sighting, where they describe a disc-shaped object, cigar-shaped object, and so on. It's very easy to think that these come from other worlds.
In addition to the Hastel lights, in 1946, thousands of people in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark witnessed what were referred to as the ghost rockets, which are some of the earliest UFO sightings on record.
Many people saw bright lights in the sky, which many people today mention as a UFO. More than 2,000 reported in Scandinavia.
For ancient astronaut theorists, these sensational UFO events beg the question: is it possible that alien entities witnessed by the Vikings are still present in this region today?
Scandinavia is undoubtedly
Fuck off,
a
Lee!
spot, and we have interesting accounts from Norse
真
folklore.
的是黑色幽默耶！
Because there are many
鸡巴歪大力才给转回去。
way that our ancestors
今晚上哪里跑了？
described real things that happened to them, but just made them into these sagas as a way of keeping the story alive and telling it to successive generations. You have to wonder if the Norwegian spiral anomaly has to do with these Nordic gods and coming and going out of this place for many thousands of years. And it could be that these Norse gods, as extraterrestrials, are still here.
Could it be that otherworldly visitors encountered by the Norse people centuries ago behind the many strange sightings reported over Scandinavia today? And do the ancient tales of these gods still resonate because they are part of humankind's true history? Perhaps one day soon, characters like Thor and Odin, long relegated to the realm of mythology, will introduce themselves to humanity once again as our alien ancestors.
真的是鸡歪生出来的，对不对？他你妈的都 fucking brain 哦！
Japan is a land rich with ancient mysteries.
In Japanese history, there's been hundreds of sightings of mysterious lights that fly in the air and also enter into the oceans. We had these underwater government actually issued a policy to shoot down UFOs.
Could it be that the entire history of this island nation has been directed by extraterrestrial visitors?
Ancient aliens brought Japan into the modern world.
Northeastern Japan, March 11th, 2011. At 2:46 p.m., the region is rocked by a 9.0 magnitude earthquake, the most powerful to ever hit the island nation. A little over 30 minutes later, a tsunami with 130-foot-tall waves smashes into the area. Among the hardest hit locations is the nearby Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
The power was cut out, the cooling system went down, and just this enormous amount of radiation went into the atmosphere.
Authorities evacuate the region and order a small team to stay behind to prevent a larger catastrophe from occurring. But days later, videos posted on social media show these workers were not alone. Video that we have at Fukushima, we see these bright golden orbs, many of them flying information. And of course, with all these orbs that we see, we know it's something technological. Curiously, almost exactly 10 years later, on February 13th, 2021, the region is rocked by another powerful earthquake. Over the next 2 months, mysterious yellow orbs are observed hovering above the Fukushima nuclear power plant.
Recently, Japanese people reported seeing UAPs in the region near the Fukushima reactor meltdown. It radiated a major part of Japan, but for some reason people are seeing UFO activity in the area.
What are the mysterious lights that have been seen flying over the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant? It's a question that prompted the Japanese government to take action. On May 28, 2024, the Japanese parliament announced the formation of an investigation unprecedented in modern Japan.
In 2024, the Japanese government issued a mandate for a bipartisan 80-member panel to investigate the UAP situation.